Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth webinar of the Mental Health Research Matters series funded by the UKRI, that's UK Research and Innovation. My name is Dan Robotham. I am the chair of the session today, and we were just waiting for a few more people to join. So as I mentioned, this webinar is part of a series. It's the fourth webinar, and we're focusing on the topic of research partnerships today. So if you've been with us for the previous webinars, then they've been on different topics. So we've had inclusive research, we've had multidisciplinary research, and we've also had expertise by experience in research. Now all of those seminars are available on YouTube if anybody wants to check them out. I'm not saying that any of those topics are not relevant today. Much of what the speakers will be talking about today will also focus on those topics too, but our main focus will be around partnerships in research. And this webinar is intended to bring people and speakers together from different sectors, specifically across the charity sector and the university sector. And this is being done as part of the UKRI's funded mental health networks. Now, if none of that means anything to you, then that's fine, because I think really what this is about, it's about bringing people together from different areas to share and talk and share ideas about how we can create knowledge and do research. So I'd like to say a quick sort of thank you for all of the speakers that we have this morning. And soon we're going to be kind of going into two different workshops where people will be speaking in a sort of series of brief presentations. So I'd like to especially thank the speakers for giving up their time this evening to talk about this topic. Now, my own experience of this is, I suppose I've worked in both the charity sector and in the university sector in the past. So I have a bit of personal knowledge about how partnerships between the two can work or not work, if you like. Now, they are possible, and we're going to hear lots and lots of examples of that today. But there are definitely some bottlenecks and some barriers, differences in the way things are funded, differences in the culture and the pace, and the differences in the ways charities and networks tend to work compared to university departments, particularly when it comes to doing research, differences in what the most important outcomes and outputs are. And some of these differences and barriers can disproportionately affect grassroots charities in my experience. I've also partnered with a couple of the networks the mental health networks that we'll be speaking today. So McPin was involved in a piece of work for the Violence, Abuse and Mental Health Network, and I'm also a member of the leadership group for the Student Mental Health Network, both of whom will be talking in the panel discussion today. So shortly we'll be asking you. I'm going to be putting up a series of sessions. I'm going to put up some slides. I'll be asking you to choose between session 1 or session 2. Now, one thing before I do that, just to remind you, as George mentioned in his introduction, so this webinar and the workshops are being recorded. Now, the logistics of that is that they're recorded in speaker view, which means that it only records the active speaker at any one time. So right now it's recording my face and my voice, but it isn't recording anybody else's face. So if you don't fancy the idea of being recorded, then your options are obviously to sort of turn your camera off, or sort of ask questions through the chat rather than using your microphone, because if you use your microphone, you will automatically appear on speaker view and then you'll appear on the webinar. So a quick way a surefire way of not appearing on the video, if you don't wish to, is to ask questions through the chat rather than via your microphone. Right, I'll put the slides on. George, do you want to put those slides up? Thank you. If we skip to, can you go back a couple of slides? Yeah, that one. Yeah. So in the first workshop, which we'll be going to in a couple of minutes' time, that will be chaired by myself. and we have Robin Hewings, who's the Programme Director from Campaign to End Loneliness, Dr. Rhiannon from Cardiff University, working with the Fostering Network. We have Rachel Whitkin, who's an independent consultant and works for the Helen Bamber Foundation in partnership with the Violence and Abuse of Mental Health Network. And we have Jo Ward, who's the coordinator at the SMaRteN Student Mental Health Network. And George, if you can skip slide one. That one, yes, that one. And wrong one. Yeah, that one. And in workshop 2, we have Emily as chair, and she will be joined by Hazel Cheeseman, who's the Deputy Chief Executive from ASH, so that's Action on Smoking and Health, and Dr. Aiman Asam from Kingston University, and Adrienne Katz from YouthWorks Consulting, talking about their partnership about digital lives in vulnerable children, and the Emerging Minds team, which I believe Emily is involved with too, and 3 speakers from the Emerging Minds team talking about placements in partner organisations. So as I mentioned, this webinar is part of a series. It's the 4th webinar, and we're focusing on the topic of research partnerships today. So if you've been with us for the previous webinars, then they've been on different topics. So we've had inclusive research, we've had multidisciplinary research, and we've also had expertise by experience in research. Now, all of those seminars are available on YouTube if anybody wants to check them out. I'm not saying that any of those topics are not relevant today. Much of what the speakers will be talking about today will also focus on those topics too, but our main focus will be around partnerships in research. And this webinar is intended to bring people and speakers together from different sectors, specifically across the charity sector and the university sector. And this is being done as part of the UKRI's funded mental health networks. Now, if none of that means anything to you, then that's fine, because I think really what this is about, it's about bringing people together from different areas to share and talk and share ideas about how we can create knowledge and do research. So I'd like to say a quick sort of thank you for all of the speakers that we have this morning. And soon we're going to be kind of going into 2 different workshops where people will be speaking in a sort of series of brief presentations. So I'd like to especially thank the speakers for giving up their time this evening to talk about this topic. Now, my own experience of this is, I suppose I've worked in both the charity sector and in the university sector in the past, so I have a bit of personal knowledge about how partnerships between the 2 can work, or not work, if you like. Now, they are possible, and we're going to hear lots and lots of examples of that today, but there are definitely some bottlenecks and some barriers, differences in the way things are funded, differences in the culture and the pace, and the differences in the ways charities and networks tend to work compared to university departments, particularly when it comes to doing research, differences in what the most important outcomes and outputs are. And some of these differences and barriers can disproportionately affect grassroots charities in my experience. I've also partnered with a couple of the networks the mental health networks that we'll be speaking today. So McPin was involved in a piece of work for the Violence, Abuse and Mental Health Network, and I'm also a member of the leadership group for the Student Mental Health Network, both of whom will be talking in the panel discussion today. So shortly we'll be asking you. I'm going to be putting up a series of sessions. I'm going to put up some slides. I'll be asking you to choose between session 1 or session 2. Now, one thing before I do that, just to remind you, as George mentioned in his introduction, so this webinar and the workshops are being recorded. Now, the logistics of that is that they're recorded in speaker view, which means that it only records the active speaker at any one time. So right now it's recording my face and my voice, but it isn't recording anybody else's face. So if you don't fancy the idea of being recorded, then your options are obviously to sort of turn your camera off, or sort of ask questions through the chat rather than using your microphone, because if you use your microphone, you will automatically appear on speaker view and then you'll appear on the webinar. So a quick way of a surefire way of not appearing on the video, if you don't wish to, is to ask questions through the chat rather than via your microphone. Right, I'll put the slides on. George, do you want to put those slides up? Thank you. If we skip to, can you go back a couple of slides? Yeah, that one. Yeah. So in the first workshop, which we'll be going to in a couple of minutes' time, that will be chaired by myself. And we have Robin Hewings, who's the Programme Director from Campaign to End Loneliness, Dr. Rhiannon Evans from Cardiff University, working with the Fostering Network. We have Rachel Whitkin, who's an independent consultant and works for the Helen Bamber Foundation in partnership with the Violence and Abuse of Mental Health Network. And we have Joe Ward, who's the coordinator at the SMaRteN Student Mental Health Network. And George, if you can skip slide one. That one, yes, that one. And wrong one. Yeah, that one. And in workshop 2, we have Emily as chair, and she will be joined by Hazel Cheeseman, who's the Deputy Chief Executive from ASH, so that's Action on Smoking and Health, and Dr. Aiman Asam from Kingston University, and Adrienne Katz from YouthWorks Consulting, talking about their partnership about digital lives in vulnerable children, and the Emerging Minds team, which I believe Emily is involved with too, and 3 speakers from the Emerging Minds team talking about placements in partner organisations. Right, thank you. Let's get started, because there's only 2 people to join now. So thank you for choosing this particular breakout. So we've got 1 hour. We've got until 6:45, and we've got 4 great speakers for you today. Now, the way we're going to run this, because I know 1 or 2 of the speakers have to leave at certain times, so we're going to ask the speakers to give a brief presentation, and then there'll be 5 minutes to ask some questions, and then we'll move to the next speaker. If there is any extra time at the end, which there may well be, then we can bring everybody back, or those speakers that are still here, bearing in mind that some of them have to leave. We can bring them back for a sort of mini panel discussion before we go back into the main session at 6:45 for a roundup. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Robin, who's our first speaker. So Robin is a Programme Director for the Campaign to End Loneliness. He's led work in response to COVID-19 and loneliness and the psychology of loneliness, and he's going to be talking to us today, I believe, about loneliness and social isolation in the mental health network. Is that right?
Yes, but I'm kind of drawing on quite a lot of different types of kind of partnerships that I've had in different kind of fields as well. So yes, if you just give me a moment while I do that kind of awkward fiddly bit of sharing my slides and hopefully get the right ones. Then hopefully you can see something which says McPin Foundation. Great.
That's
very
good.
nice. Thank you, Rachel, for nodding. That's very kind. Right. So yes. So the Campaign to End Loneliness, just to quickly introduce us. So we've existed for the last decade, and kind of partnerships are kind of vitally important part of what we do. So we develop evidence ourselves, drawing significantly on academic work, but also from kind of the work of practitioners in the field of loneliness of various different types, and obviously also from the views and experiences of people who are lonely, who have been lonely, or are at high risk of being lonely. And then what we also try to do is bring together a community of organisations to share their expertise and experience, and again, with that kind of interdisciplinary mix, and then make the case to decision makers. And in loneliness, we've done a lot of work, particularly with central government, about action on loneliness across society. And then we're here today, particularly because of work that we've done with the Loneliness and Social Isolation Mental Health Network at UCL. But yes, we're kind of, what I'm going to be saying will be kind of drawing on kind of wider experiences than just that. So before I worked on loneliness, I've also worked on other issues kind of connected to health. So I spent a long time working on diabetes, and it's great to see Hazel Cheeseman, who I know from a previous life working in tobacco control as well. And the kinds of partnerships that we've had have been a mixture of kind of expert reference groups, including helping to run ones with kind of central government, commissioned research, and also, I think, importantly, a lot of the more kind of informal one-off kind of contact about particular things that might be coming up, or kind of getting to know people in a kind of particular area of research as well. And just to say, it's been absolutely, I've been working in this field, I suppose, for about 15 years. One of the most kind of stimulating and interesting parts of this job was kind of having that opportunity to get into the evidence base and work and talk with researchers and have that conversation. So the reason why it's important is that we have this partnership is that organisations like ours, I think, are really important to getting research into practice, which obviously is kind of a significant part of the point. And I think there's a few reasons for that. The most very obvious one is that decision makers will rarely have time to read research reports themselves, and so that kind of translational thing is kind of important. But I think going slightly more deeper than that, I think that for decision makers, it's really important that they know that the kind of stakeholders around a particular issue will broadly support a particular kind of initiative or approach. So they're interested in they're interested in the evidence base, but they also want to know what the major organisations in that area are thinking. They might be interested in kind of particular kind of professional bodies or patient groups or so and so on. And so, yeah, that kind of stakeholder support is really critical. And finally, decision makers it's very important that there's kind of public communications about different areas of policy, and that there's kind of public support as well. And in terms of like, how is that going to happen? Organisations for whom advocacy are an important part of their role are going to be one of the main ways of achieving that, and kind of communicating through the media, communicating with MPs and communicating with civil servants as well. So in terms of like how to build them, the first question was kind of how to start. And obviously the starting point obviously is good quality and kind of practical research that addresses real problems that people are facing. So for example, working in lonely, what are the things that would make a difference there, and you want to see with the costs and benefits of that. And I think this is, for myself, kind of hard to avoid repeating this bit. Is that the most important thing is that I think that it's a kind of an appreciative relationship with partner organisations that kind of understands and respects the different kind of perspectives and backgrounds that people might have. And I think it can also be useful in the right way. Organisations like ours are generally very, very small and with very limited capacity, but in a kind of proportionate way to kind of have input from a relatively early stage. And also we can be very useful research partners through the life of a kind of project. So, for example, the Campaign to End Loneliness obviously has been closely involved in the loneliness and social isolation research network over many years, and just having that kind of ongoing conversation, I think, is particularly valuable. So in terms of kind of challenges and barriers, I think that I've kind of gone this from kind of, you know, from kind of a common issue to things which can be a bit rarer, but I think are also worth mentioning. So, and I think we've already had this alluded to in the beginning of this, is that there are very different timelines in academia as opposed to partner organisations which are more kind of policy focused. We are often on a kind of a much more kind of annual planning cycle, and the kind of decision makers that we're working with are often kind of changing at great speed. So, you know, for example, you know, we're on our 5th loneliness minister since the kind of creation of the post, and so there's often just a lot of change with our kind of decision makers. And I think another issue is that particularly at the kind of more kind of leadership level in research, there can be amazing kind of stability. People who've worked on an issue not just for a year or two, but sometimes for decades, or even an entire kind of professional career. And in organisations like ours, that kind of stability is much rarer. So as I talked about at the beginning, I've moved from a few issues, and I think that would generally be very, very typical of people in organisations like mine. And I think that's just the way in which the kind of organisations and kind of professional development is structured, that will be quite common, that there is that kind of staff turnover, meaning that it can be harder to hold some of those really, really long-lasting relationships. And I would imagine that it's probably quite annoying for people working on the research side when there can be greater kind of turnover at our end. There can also be quite different approaches to language as well. So obviously the kind of key focus of academia is absolute precision, and whereas people in organisations like mine, particularly if we're trying to communicate with the public, I think our kind of mantra would be this one drawn from kind of political campaigning, that it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And so you're trying to make sure, and this is probably, I think, one of the hardest parts of my job, and something that we can spend quite a lot of time kind of debating and negotiating, and actually probably should spend more time actually kind of testing, which is, what do people actually hear and understand when you use a particular term? And it's a real struggle to make sure that you're using language that people can readily understand at a kind of speed with which they will kind of get there. And I think we're kind of often aiming for not kind of perfection, but something that is kind of good enough in the language that we use, that will mean that people have got a kind of broadly correct understanding, and that we're not kind of exaggerating what we're saying, and equally we're not kind of underplaying it or wrapping it up in so much kind of technical language that it just won't land. And I think that can be a bit of a clash. And then I think this is a much rarer issue, but it is something which can be a struggle, which is that I think that in research there can often be a slightly kind of greater tendency towards wanting to attack a policy that might have been taken up by the government, whereas if you're in an organisation like mine, then your focus is much more about kind of holding on to the gains that you've had and encouraging people working in central government to kind of keep it up. And so there can sometimes be a bit of a clash there, that you've got something going and then you're kind of getting attacked from from kind of researchers, and sometimes in ways which are fair enough, and sometimes in ways which are kind of a bit less kind of serious, really. And in terms of what I've learned about academics from this process is firstly, obviously, that I think that the kind of people really care about and have a long-term commitment to their area. They really care about having an impact. And I think, to be honest, that academics come in as many varieties as any other group of people. You meet people who are absolutely brilliant, people meet a much smaller group of people who can be tricky in other ways. But it's just a very, very broad group of people, and that's that kind of. I think I'd be very reluctant to make any great broad generalizations about traits or anything like that. And then my kind of top tips is really to kind of value that difference of approach, that we see the world from a sympathetic but somewhat different perspective, and having good conversations about how to do that is something which is really important. Organisations like ours can be a way of reaching ultimate beneficiaries of your work. It can be connecting to other organisations. Obviously, that's a particular focus for us. And I would say that in the kind of pipeline from kind of research to practice, the kind of partner organisations like ours are a vital way of making sure that you have an impact. I hope that's useful, and I hope I've just about kept time.
Thank you, Robin. That's fantastic. And just about, we've got 3 minutes for questions. So that's probably time for about 2 questions. Have there been any in the chat, or does anyone want to raise a question now? Okay. In that case, I will ask one. So you mentioned
yeah, so a good example would be, I used to look in diabetes. There's a NHS health check program, which was, in the context of the political constraints at the time, pretty good. And we thought it was more likely to be lost than extended. I remember someone doing a really unhelpful piece of research, trying to compare it to a soft drinks tax, sugar tax, and basically saying that, and then they kind of shrunk their timelines in a way that was not terribly helpful to the kind of taking fairly the aims of the health check program. And so I could see why they wanted to say it's not so much about one-to-one services, it's more about population level stuff, which is broadly true. But slagging off the health check program isn't going to get you a sugar levy. And actually, the kind of idea that these were things which were in competition with each other, I think was just a fundamental misunderstanding of the politics, which would obviously be much more in my area of interest than a kind of health economists, really. Someone who, before I was in this kind of business, was working in politics. So that was an example. And we had other examples with the NHS diabetes program, where it becomes the policy and it then becomes something that people want to kind of slag off in one way or another, when in general, you've got people trying to kind of work hard to set up a program. It will take some time to get there, but in general, I think it's delivered pretty well. And so just the fact that it's policy then makes it come under attack, and that is kind of can be a definite difference as well. Similar examples in tobacco as well.
So it's a bit like picking your battles, like making sure that you pick the right battles, and you're there sort of focusing on your strategic objectives rather than getting sort of drawn into lots of little things, or things that are sort of peripheral to your mission. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Probably got time for a quick second question if anyone's. Okay, so yeah, Vanessa's put something in the chat. Tip for academics to be realistic about how we can inform policy and work with your expertise and be guided by an organisation such as yourself. Anyone? Any other questions?
I think just to kind of bounce off what Vanessa was saying, I think organisations like ours are quite focused on the kind of political reality and the budgetary reality, and that is really important. People take account of that. But I think that the kind of sometimes really long-term research that takes 5 or 10 years to come to fruition and takes it sometimes even longer than after that to turn into policy, could absolutely be really valuable. We kind of stand on the shoulders of giants on any issue. Things happening in 2022 are sometimes due to research that was happening in the 70s and 80s. And I think it's important not to kind of, I don't want to overstate that we're the only people we know about kind of decision making, but it's useful to kind of have respectful conversations between these two perspectives.
Thank you, Robin. I know you have to rush off now, but maybe hopefully see you later.
By 25 past. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Rhiannon Evans. She's a reader of social science and health at Cardiff University. She's the academic lead for the Healthy Social Relationships Research Programme. She focuses on improvement of wellbeing of children and young people and prevention of suicide and self-harm. And she's going to talk to us about her work with the Fostering Network, which is a UK fostering charity.
Great, thanks very much, and thanks to Robin for his great presentation as well. So hopefully that seamlessly come up. So thank you so much for the invitation to talk. So as Dan said, I'm going to talk a little bit about our project, but I'm just going to reflect on the process of this project, some of our learning points, and really just some recommendations that we would encourage you to take forward really to make this collaboration work. So we were funded as part of the Triumph Network, which is one of the UKRI funded networks to improve the mental health and wellbeing of young people. So we focused on the mental health and wellbeing of care experienced young people, and we had a co-produced research study, and these are the collaborators. So just to outline really the network and then our work within it. So the infographic outlines what the Triumph Network is about. So it's really focused on the co-design and co-production of mental health and wellbeing interventions for young people, with this real focus on transdisciplinary research and a co-production lens. So I lead the key groups program within that, which was about LGBTQ+ and care experiencing people who have elevated risk of poor mental health. So within that, we had a study which really came out of the pandemic, which was really to understand what was important to young people, their carers and practitioners in terms of delivering mental health and wellbeing services, particularly online in comparison to in-person or blended delivery during the pandemic, and looking about what could be retained after the pandemic ended, hopefully, and what needed to transition back to in-person. So the key learning point here really was about the partners that we had. So it was a collaboration between the Fostering Network in Wales, which is a third sector organisation, which does a huge amount of work around foster carers, kinship carers and young people in care, and advocacy and training service. Also Cascade Voices. So this is a third sector organisation linked to Cardiff University, which is a group of care experiencing people who advise and engage on the research process. And then it was also Cardiff University and Glasgow University. So what I've just done, I've got a handful of slides really just to guide us through the process that we went through and where we really had challenges, but also where we learned a lot. So I've just sort of thought about this, what we called was a knowledge of co-creation cycle of knowledge co-creation. And it was thinking about the steps that we would undertake. And I think there's just a couple of principles that if you take away anything from here, it's these 2 points really. So it might feel like it's a given, but actually this isn't always the case, about involving those who have learned and lived experiences at all stages of the research process. So we often see that people come in at the knowledge translation stage where we want to achieve impact and change, but actually by the time the research has started, you should have a really comprehensive platform of expertise across both learned and lived experience. And then the second point was something that someone said to me recently, and I've really taken this on and reflected on it quite a lot, about recognizing that the process of research in terms of collaboration, it should be porous but transparent. So this means that at different stages, we bring in different expertise and different stakeholders, depending on where we might have gaps. It's okay for that to evolve and change, but ensuring the transparency, that we have a rationale for bringing in different groups. That might be to rebalance the voices that we're privileging, but that it's not just one person who decides who gets platformed, that we have collective decision making about where we need more voices and how and when we bring them in. So I'm just going to transition us through sort of the 3 key stages that we undertook as part of this to shape the research programme. So the first was about the research formulation. So a lot of our research in this case and example was led by the fostering network. So they had what they called a wicked problem, that they couldn't find a way through, that they didn't necessarily know how they were going to deliver services online long term, and they had no way of collecting people's voices to shape it. So they needed a research project delivered. So for us, and what made the collaboration such a success was this engagement of stakeholders from the outset. And that engagement led to defining what was a socially meaningful problem for stakeholders and those affected by it. Really focusing on co-producing the research focus and the questions. So we're asking meaningful questions that link to the problem. And really helpful for us from the outset of thinking about prioritizing outputs and impacts. And I think this might link to some of what Robin was saying about thinking about proximal outputs, longer term outputs, and making sure the needs of diverse stakeholders are being met through a suite of complementary but different outputs and impacts. And I think the challenge for us, and I'd always reflect back, is about managing the expectations and being realistic, especially with care experience young people that we've worked with, of just conveying that idea that this knowledge might be incremental, it will contribute to something, but we won't necessarily see a transformation straight away. And I think that's really important for sustaining long-term collaborative relationships. So the second phase then is about the actual process of research generation and how that really worked for us in terms of that collaborating. So there were 2 sort of ways in which our partners, Cascade Voices and the Fostering Network in Wales, really supported the research process. So some of you might have experience of this, but if not, firstly was they supported us on the recruitment of individuals to participate in the study. So we see a lot, and thankfully we have started to see a shift in the discourse around the hard to reach trope in research, and the fact that some individuals might have been marginalised and not represented. And the engagement with these groups really allows us to think about who is being underserved, where are we not working hard enough to engage people in research, and they can really help us to link into those networks and find that work with people in spaces that feel safe and comfortable to them. So that was really key on the recruitment phase. But the second part, which was particularly effective for this study, was peer research and having a peer researcher. So we had Brittany, who was from Cascade Voices. Brittany is an amazing young woman who is care experienced to herself. So she's now at the age of 25 and is a care leaver. And she worked with us as a peer researcher, interviewing other care experienced young people and doing the analysis of the data. So this was really powerful and useful for us in a number of ways, and I'd really sort of recommend people making this work in their own research studies. So there's all of the piece about the power dynamics, that it felt much more egalitarian and accessible, having a care experienced young person also doing the interviews for those other young people. It was really helpful around the interpretation. So we did some member checking of how representative our findings were. For Brittany, was really vital in drawing out actually what was meaningful in terms of impacts and implications for care experienced young people, and prevented any sort of leaning towards research priorities within there. The third part, which was really vital for us, was about the ethics and the governance of the study and the issues about anonymity. Having someone who was care experienced to look at our findings and see where perhaps our version of anonymity and their version of anonymity was slightly different was really important. She was able to pick up perhaps when something would compromise an individual and we hadn't taken sufficient steps around anonymity. So that really worked for us. But I think one of the issues we do see around this sort of stakeholder engagement piece is that it can become tokenistic, and we do risk homogenizing what is a very heterogeneous group. So for care experienced people in particular, they're often treated as care experienced, but actually we have a huge amount of diversity in terms of where they are on the care journey, the different type of care placements that they're in. So you might not be able to represent everyone through all the stakeholder involvement, but it's really important that you're aware of your limitations in doing that. So the third and last phase that we had engagement with stakeholders that was really vital for us is around the final stage of knowledge translation. So within this, we have aimed to and continue to aim, and I'll show you a couple of examples in the next 2 slides, of a range of audiences and different networks. And I think one of the things I really want to convey to you, and which was being fed back to us a lot by care experiencing people, was ensuring that the priority in the translation is returning to the stakeholder groups that you visited with earlier in the process. So if you have groups involved in those earlier 2 stages, make sure you go back and say, this is how we created impact, this is what we did off the back of it. So it actually completes the knowledge co-creation cycle. So a number of young people have said that they feel a bit disillusioned with research because they feel that they give very openly their expertise and their experiences, but they never know what happens to the data. And then in 6 months' time, they have other researchers come and ask similar questions. You know, what are the key risk factors for your mental health, etc. And it just feels a process of extraction rather than meaningful co-production. So making sure that you're returning to it. And as I said, also in the research formulation, it's thinking about how you're going to work in that later stage around the diverse impact activities that relate to different stakeholder priorities. So are there practice implications? Are there, is it co-creating a future research agenda, etc. And I think just being mindful of some of the challenges in this, I think Robin picked up on this, things about the misalignment in timeframes. So recognize a suite of outputs which can be responsive to these different timeframes. And within that, thinking about you might need some proximal impacts. So I'll just show you a couple of quick examples as the last 2 slides of what we tried to do in terms of more proximal impacts that young people said were a really key priority. So we had our wider research agenda about trying to build the knowledge and evidence base about what interventions work for care experiencing young people, but that's probably 5 to 10 years for us to get there. So young people sort of cited 2 key things that they wanted now, and that would be really helpful for them. So the first, which was funded by Cardiff University and is in process, was trying to identify resources that are out there for care experiencing young people. They said that there was lots of available support, but they didn't know what was tailored and really supportive for care experiencing young people. So we've been doing a lot of testing of different resources, getting feedback from Cascade Voices, and are currently co-developing an online resource hub in order that even now, if they wanted to go and get some mental health services, they knew what was supportive for care experiencing young people. And the second thing they wanted was just to try and leverage the networks a bit more and spread information much more accessibly than perhaps what research does. So with the Fostering Network in Wales, we've produced the Thrive magazine, which has gone out to all care experiencing young people in Wales, but also across the UK, which lists some of the key resources and some just helpful information about mental health. So there's some of the more proximal things we've been doing for the moment. So that kind of brings me to the end. So dear Van, and I've got time for a couple of questions or reflections if anyone had anything.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Has anybody got any questions for... we've got a question. Probably got time for one question, I think, and Sarah's put it in the chat. So it says, I'd love to hear more about your peer researcher and how this worked. And this was the same question that I had as well, actually, as it's something we've been exploring. For example, was the peer researcher employed as staff? How can one peer researcher represent a diverse group? So I'm slightly conscious of time, but it's a question. Yeah,
so that's great. So to be honest, the university bureaucracy is always against the peer researcher model. That's the starting point. So we did employ them in the same way we kind of use job shop or other models for often employing students or undergraduates. So we went through that option because Brittany was in the process of searching for work. So it was also about, thinking what suited her life circumstances. So she was temporarily a member of staff. So I absolutely get your point that she wasn't representative of all care experienced young people. The grant was relatively small, and I would think in future about having more young people to definitely act as researchers. So it was great in principle, but yeah, I definitely think if you can get some more, particularly diversity in terms of their identity, that would be wonderful. I would highly recommend it. But I'm happy to get in touch afterwards if that's helpful to any of you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Well, I know you have to leave fairly soon as well, don't you? And the other question was very similar to that one. So I think we all sort of coalesced on that particular question. So that's brilliant. And so thank you very much, Rhiannon, for your presentation. I believe you have to leave at 6:32. And thanks for the thoughtful questions. Pity we didn't have a little bit more time for them. So let's move on to our third speaker, which is Jo Ward. She is the network coordinator for SMaRteN, Student Mental Health Network. She coordinates the activity of the network, and she's also volunteered for various charities in the past. And she's going to be talking about some of the partnerships that the SMaRteN network, Student Mental Health Network, has developed.
Give me 1 second, perhaps. If we just have maybe one more question for Rhiannon.
Okay, maybe one more question for Rhiannon.
Let's do
that. Is there another question for Rhiannon whilst Jo's getting her slides up?
So
Becky, yes, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it does. It's following on from the other question was asked. Actually, thank you. That was such a really interesting, fantastic talk and some really great work. Yeah, and I was interested to know it's a little bit more about the peer researcher role and the sort of training that you offered, because I know you mentioned that Brittany supported with interviews and analysis. So it would be kind of interesting to know about that side of things.
Of course. So I did just send you a direct message, so I can put you in touch.
Oh.
So in the one centre we have Cascade, all of our centres actually have a dedicated youth engagement officer who are usually youth workers. So for this project, we had Rachel Bourne, who is the youth engagement officer for the centre. So she did quite a lot of training with Brittany. So taught, like, there was some sessions teaching about the principles of research. Then they did some mock interviews and then kind of transcribed them, then went back and then reflected on them. Then in terms of the analysis, they took a subset of the data or interviews together and kind of worked through them together, thinking about, what might be meaningful, what might we code in that way. But we've also, probably just a note with that, we tried to look at other opportunities with Brittany. So she did get a job by that point, so it was difficult to do it. But she did some teaching on the Masters in Social Work programme, kind of teaching about peer support. So we also tried to think about, other opportunities which were just helpful for her CV as well, and kind of passing on that learning as well. I'm happy to put you in touch with Rachel if you want to. So do email me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Thank you for the questions as well. I'm glad we got a chance to put that in. Jo, are you back?
Yes, I returned.
You are. You're back. Okay.
Can you see these okay?
We can all see. We can all see.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Jo Ward. I'm the network coordinator for SMaRteN. I'm going to be speaking about something a little bit different that we did, in that I'll be speaking about one specific project that we ran in partnership with a different organisation, rather than sort of a piece of or approach to research per se. So as you can see, I'm talking about a podcast project. This is the Keeping Students in Mind, Understanding Student Mental Health Research, SMaRteN and All Things Mental Health student podcast series. So there is a link there if you would like to kind of check out what we've done. Apologies, it's slightly word heavy for me, sort of more me speaking, but I do have some slides with my top tips coming up, fear not. So essentially the reason I wanted to talk about this project was because I think it speaks pretty well to some of the other elements that this series of webinars has touched upon, such as kind of co-creation and engaging students and lived experience, because the whole aim of this project was essentially that as we came towards the end of the SMaRteN life cycle, we realised that we'd worked really hard to engage students in a co-creative way in our research, but we're concerned that maybe the follow-on from that wasn't really happening. So we wanted to find a way to actually engage new students with the research findings themselves. So actually kind of saying to students, research into student mental health and wellbeing is happening. People do care, you know, this is what's been going on. So essentially kind of reporting our findings back to students. One of the things that we would sort of identify with lived experience working is that sometimes it can feel a bit exploitative with people getting involved, but never really seeing the impact within their sort of community. To help us kind of consider our reach, we did some research and we set upon the idea of podcasts as being a really good way for us to engage students and share our work and share our learnings. This is in part because we were kind of operating during the COVID culture, shall I say. So there had been a kind of real rise in that kind of online engagement and podcast culture. But podcast wasn't something that we knew anything about, and it wasn't something I had any technical capabilities to be able to undertake at all. But we did our research, as I say, and that's what led us to All Things Mental Health. Looking at what was kind of out there and what was already popular or where the gaps were, we sort of realised that the All Things Mental Health team had a similar aim to us, in that they had a podcast project that was all about mental health research, and it was all about engaging underrepresented groups or sort of stakeholders who maybe didn't always get a seat at the table. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we kind of reached out to the team and asked whether they would be interested to work with us, and that's what led to the development of the series. So moving on, you can kind of see here the call out that we used, and I'll kind of go on to explain a little bit more about how the project actually worked. So at the time that we started working with All Things Mental Health, they were also looking to slightly change up their ways of working a little. Their main host, Aniska, and the sort of lead and founder of the team, alongside this, she's a superstar, was trying to finalise her master's study at Oxford, and the team there all had additional kind of responsibilities themselves. And so for this reason, we then brought in another collaborator. So Nicole Bergow has a podcast called PhD and was a KCL student, so had some idea of kind of how podcasts might overlap with existing KCL comms work, and she came on board as another partner. And together we were kind of discussing everything, and very much became clear to us that we all wanted to do a better job of engaging students and young people as an audience within mental health. And then rather than kind of reporting back to them with our own voice, we wanted to kind of put their voice right at the centre. So we opened up applications for student hosts. So students who again wanted to come on board as further partners in this project to record their own podcast episodes. So we were able to recruit 4 brilliant students who essentially worked with us to put together a podcast series that meant they got to talk about a subject they felt passionate about, but in tandem with a SMaRteN researcher. So based on their area of interest, we matched them up with one of our funded projects that kind of overlapped with what they thought was important. And they interviewed that researcher and kind of spoke around the issue, and they provided a real kind of extra layer of student voice within the project. So moving on now, more just to kind of talk a little bit, just because I'm conscious of time, just about some of the ways that I think this was quite a successful partnership. So obviously, first and foremost, as I said, I didn't really know how to set up a podcast series in the first place. Whilst I might have had lots of grand ideas about what I thought we should be doing, I didn't have any technical know-how, and the mental health team there did. We were able to use their existing knowledge of the sort of podcast sector, for want of a better term, and the actual processes and logistics of recording and transmitting a podcast and putting it out there, to actually create the series. And having their skill set also meant that we could then offer training and mentorship to the students who we brought on board. So we were kind of passing on this knowledge and providing a real development opportunity for these students. This was something that I felt quite strongly about, because as someone who thought this would be cool to do, but I don't know how to do it, it was wonderful to be able to give these students a chance to learn new skills and kind of polish their CV as well. So as part of recruitment, you'll have just seen the call out that we used, but by working with All Things Mental Health, we were able to kind of share this call out on their social media channels and on our own social media channels. And this worked really well for both of us, because it meant that they were reaching a new audience with our kind of followers, and we were reaching a new younger audience with their existing followers. And as I had sort of referenced earlier on, we did have very similar aims, and it meant that rather than us kind of both competing in the same space, we were working together. We weren't reinventing the wheel, and we were kind of creating one really polished output for people to engage with. But what does SMaRteN bring to the table? I'm maybe selling us short thus far. Our funding meant that we were able to pay the All Things Mental Health team for the time they spent working on the project, as sort of obviously quite trained, technically knowledgeable individuals. We thought it was important that we recognise this. It also meant that we were able to pay our students for their time, because again, they were taking time out of their day to learn new skills, and it was an intense process for them, and we thought it was important to show how much we valued their time and their energies. And this, I think, is a real sort of strength of this type of partnership working, recognising that you are working with other professionals, or those, as I say, who are using their own knowledge, their own sort of lived experience. It's important to have a lot of respect and recognise the value of that in a tangible way. But it also created kind of professional working standards. So it meant that the expectations of what we were doing were clear for everyone. We could set sort of timeframes and deadlines with an expectation that it was a paid partnership role, and that we'd all be kind of working to these. We also held a lot of our meetings outside of the 9 to 5 slot, because the All Things Mental Health team had existing commitments, and obviously so did our students. And again, it was just a way of this kind of partnership working being able to be a more respectful kind of professional approach, where we were working with each other to create the best culture, relationship and environment for kind of creativity to thrive, really. Now this is very, very text heavy, so I'll leave it up whilst I talk, but it's just a quote from Anna, who is someone who we work with, who recently joined the All Things Mental Health team as their kind of researcher in residence. So she's a PhD student who's joined the team, and she has recently started working on the project. And so this kind of outlines from her point of view, as she can't be with us today, what she sees as the real strengths of this partnership. The reason that we have been working with Anna as a newbie on the All Things Mental Health team is because we successfully released our first series a few months ago now, in line with the University Mental Health Day. But recently we all came back together and, as part of the SMaRteN Showcase activity, recorded a reunion episode with our student hosts as well. This was a time for them to reflect on how their attitudes to mental health might have sort of changed, and things they can identify about their time of university that worked well, and where their gaps are. So this has been a great sort of extra piece of public engagement and comms for SMaRteN and for our projects, but has also been a great way for us to learn from these students and think about where the conversation needs to go next. We are working with the team to recruit a new cohort of student hosts, and we will be kicking off recruitment for our series 2 on Monday. So do keep your eyes peeled and watch the space. So I'll just carry on there. A few more words from Anna, but obviously these can be kind of shared with you after the session. And sort of just to say, as I mentioned, we're working on a second series because it has been a successful partnership, and both us and All Things Mental Health and all of the students have had a really positive time. So this just kind of a little bit to give a shout out to all of my wonderful collaborators and partners in this project who can't be with us today.
Thank you, Jo, and thanks for walking us through the SMaRteN network, which I am very familiar with. Now, we don't have any time for questions, unfortunately, and I know you have to go around about now anyway. But if there are any questions for Jo, can you please put them in the chat, and we can email them to her afterwards as part of kind of a post-event follow-up. So I'm going to move quickly onwards. Now, I know there's a timer in the top right which says 7 minutes. I believe we have more than that, because we started the group a little earlier than planned. So I hope that doesn't boot us out after 7 minutes. So we're looking at sort of getting that fixed. So don't worry, Rachel, we will have a bit more time than that says in the top right. So now moving on to Rachel, who's our final speaker. She's an independent consultant and a director of counter-trafficking and publications with McPin Foundation. She also runs a specialist counter-trafficking program and works in partnership with professionals across fields to provide accessible publications about care and support for survivors. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much. No pressure there then with the 7 minutes, but I shall do my best. Just to say that I'm frontline with survivors, and I'm really an NGO person, but I have a different mixed professional background, and everything that I do is to do with partnerships. Some of the publications I've recently been involved with, actually, for example, the National Referral Mechanism Handbook, which is published by the OSCE this year, involves experts, academics, health professionals and practitioners, as well as survivor leaders across the world, for the OSCE participating member states. So that was a huge project. It took about 4 years of really dedicated work and research. I also, with my colleague who's a clinical psychologist at the Helen Bamber Foundation, Dr. Katie Robjant, I co-authored the Trauma-Informed Code of Conduct for all professionals working with survivors of trafficking and slavery. And one of the main things that I'm very concerned with is making sure that work that we produce together as a sector and together with academia is adaptable for many different systems and as useful to people as possible. And today what I wanted to do was just show you a little bit about an interesting project which has involved Charlie Parfitis, who I think you know, she's amazing, at King's College London. She's not here with us tonight, but if she was, it would be great because we could tell you a little bit more about it together. So I'm just going to share my slides now. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, can everybody see this? Can I just thank you, Robin? Thank you for nodding. Okay, so this is the modern slavery core outcome set, and I think it's a really good example of how partnership working can really operate to keep everything going beyond its lifetime, so that And what the people who arranged this project did was create a community of practice afterwards. So as you can see at the bottom there, it's a mix of academics such as University of Nottingham Rights Lab, University of East London, King's College London, who are a major player in it, Survivor Alliance, which is an organisation of survivor leaders internationally, Helen Bamber Foundation. We are a multidisciplinary human rights and clinical charity working with survivors of trafficking, and our funders were the Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Centre, which is called MSPEC, and they actually specialise in funding projects that bring academics and practitioners together. So I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the academic side of this project, although, as you can see, it involved several stages. It was very carefully done. It's written up at the website that you can see here, and we have some forthcoming products that if you're interested in becoming part of our community of practice, please just let us know, because we have some really interesting things coming up. It was very interesting for me, as somebody who's written about the need for trauma-informed working and consistent services and provision for survivors of trafficking for many, many years, because this was the first eDelphi survey of its kind, with survivor leaders and survivors at the heart of everything and participating greatly in this, to come out with outcomes which were core outcomes for the recovery and well-being of survivors of trafficking. So it was asking them, what do you need and what's essential for you? So the core outcome set is outcomes are measured across all interventions as a standard, creating a stronger evidence base. So the first part of this project is to find out what are the core outcomes and then to develop them further, which I'll explain. Identifying priority outcomes for survivors and bringing all stakeholders together to agree on what is important while centering survivor opinions. So what we came up with in the end, after many, many iterations, literature reviews, eDelphi surveys, workshops where everything was discussed, there was a lot of work put into this. There are 7 core outcomes, which, as you can see, start with housing, which is a massive issue in our area, I'm afraid. People who come out of slavery have horrific housing, and it's almost across the board a disaster and puts them at risk. Then we had long-term consistent support, which gives access to other things for survivors. So it became at number 2, which was quite exciting. Finding purpose in life and self-actualization, safety from any trafficker or other abuser, which acknowledges that it's not just the original traffickers people are at risk from. Access to medical treatment, access to education, compassionate trauma-informed services. Fantastic. What do you do with that list? How do you engage people in being excited about a list that they already feel they know a lot about anyway? And that is why collaborations come together to create something else. So we decided to make a practice model, and that's what this looks like. So taking the academic list, or the list that's come out of this long-term process, we designed what it looks like on the ground, because this is how we actually work and this is what it needs to look like. So as you can see, the trauma-informed services and the long-term consistent support wrap around the survivor in the centre, together with the other core outcomes. And we very carefully chose icons for the core outcomes that mean that they can be very widely interpreted and worked on so that they become standards within themselves. It's really important that we don't have organisations saying, oh, yes, we do all that. Yes, we provide that, without actually having to answer for it, because services are so, there are so many problems in our area of work to create safe spaces for people to recover, to get well-being, to seek justice from their traffickers, and also not to be re-trafficked. So that's something that we work on the ground. So this is the practice model, and immediately there's a sort of visual recognition of what we're doing, but the basis for it is actually academic, and this is very exciting for us. I've got 58 seconds. It feels so unfair.
We will keep you going in the main room. Rachel,
I think they'll kick us out, actually.
I think Exactly, and then we can keep going in the main room if that's what.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly.
We kicked out. We shouldn't be kicked out. We're trying to get you an extra 10 minutes, so you should just keep talking. It should be fine.
Okay, what is a community of practice? Now, this was really foresight on the part of Charlie and Hazel, who run this project from King's College, and the other people who applied for the funding for this, because they decided we don't want this to go on another shelf. Modern slavery is something where people are constantly producing amazing work, reports, models, academic structures, frameworks for working, frontline information, risk assessments, recovery assessments, all of these things, and they just go on a shelf because there is no time to really focus down on them. And so the community of practice creation was really had a
Absolutely, I'm so sorry. We
No, don't worry.
The time we were trying to. It's just
don't worry at all. It's fine. So, community of practice is something that I'm going to invite you all to in a minute. So, it's a really it creates the social fabric for enabling collective learning, and foreseeing this at the beginning of the project, I think, was really brilliant, because it means that we have funding to continue and to make sure that there's a much wider buy-in to this topic. And to do that, we created the design so that people have maybe even a kite mark in the future or an emblem that they can relate to, where they can recognize that and be core outcome compliant, as it were. At the heart of this project is our MS-COS Research Advisory Board, who are experts by lived experience. So they're survivors of human trafficking. They come from a variety of backgrounds in all senses, and they are absolutely remarkable to work with. And it was really important that they drove the ethical practice that goes throughout the project about how to employ survivor leaders. And so that was a very important part of what we did. And they've been at the center of every single decision, and of course, core to the leadership of the whole project. What I think is very useful to me, as somebody who works alongside a big sector of people in all fields who are doing incredible work, like the work that you see here, is to bring them together and be able to fit their communities of their practice into our community of practice. For example, on the right there, you see a core outcome set on child maltreatment and domestic violence, which was created by Emma Howarth at the University of East London and her partners. And that's actually made it into Home Office policy. It's for children, and it's often considered outside of children who've been trafficked, particularly those who have immigration status that is lacking, or British children who don't get the attention they need. And so these kind of models, together with, as you can see, the positive outcomes framework for children on the left, which is ECPAT UK, and University of Sheffield Hallam, which is another one of these kind of mixes. That's an absolutely brilliant model. These two are brilliant and can be pulled together to make sure that when we're doing our core outcome set for adults, that we have the children's side and that we're promoting other platforms and other work. The Lundy model for children is emphasised in the National Referral Mechanism Handbook that I mentioned earlier, and that's also something that ties together situations for children. The In3 project, which is something that is related to other universities, such as University College London for Global Health and the Jill Dando Institute, and also Ella Cockbain at UCL and King's and Charlie. That is a project that's going to come together into our community of practice. And here, because this is about trafficking, we have a criminal justice risk framework from Craig Barlow, who's an independent consultant. And these are just some of many ideas and options that we can have to make sure that other people's work's platformed, because actually all of this falls within our 7 core outcomes. So at the end, we are going forward in this way. Podcasts, I heard the speaker before, we also are newbies at podcasts, but we're gonna do it. And one of the things about partnerships is the help with that, you know, and the fact that you learn from other people's methods and support each other, and it's very supportive because it's multidisciplinary. So it isn't a competitive thing. It's more a really collaborative thing. And it gives so much longer life to projects, especially if you have an evidence base to prove what you've been saying. You know, you get that from academia. On the other hand, academics need to know what is actually adaptable for frontline people. What will they actually take on and really adapt into their existing systems? Because on the front line, you're in a crazy hectic pace. It's risky. There are people working in very dangerous or very difficult situations, and they need, for example, standards and measures that are really usable. And in order to understand the usability of measures and standards, that takes a sort of coming together. So just to say, if anybody's interested in this, please do contact me via the organisers of this brilliant event, because we are looking for people across sectors who are interested in modern slavery, human trafficking, and promoting the core outcome set. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry about the technical hitch in the middle, but I think we got through it. You had plenty of time. So we got time for a question. If anyone has a question, we're going to. Does anyone have a question for Rachel? I believe Robin's back. Robin's back too. Robin's got a question for Rachel.
Rachel, I was really interested in your community of practice, and I was wondering how you've gone about kind of keeping people engaged in it, and I was wondering quite how many different types of backgrounds people were engaging in that community from, and also how much management it took to sustain it.
Well, that's the question we're answering as we go along, to be honest. I think the first thing to do is to meet people on their own terms. So we have been meeting, myself and the community of practice fellow who is employed in this, Queenie Sit. We've been meeting with different professionals. Like, for example, we met with a law firm, then we're meeting with housing people, then we're meeting with councils. We've met with the modern slavery unit of the Home Office. All of these people need to hear different things about how this is going to work for them. And you have to make sure that, I think, particularly, you're not overburdening people and saying, right, we need you at this meeting, this forum. What it is, it's an invitation for them to join in at the places that they want to join in, and also to offer them a platform for their work. So it's a case of really understanding who they are first, and going and taking their work to them and saying, we love the way you've done this. We actually see how that is fits in to the core outcome set, and we would love you to talk about that work in relation to the community of practice and join that way, because people need an incentive. Do you know what I mean? And you need to understand their methods of working as well, and understand also, because I think quite a few of the speakers have been saying this, people work very differently. Academics and frontline professionals working with survivors work really, really differently. So it's a case of tuning into how they best want to attend and not overburdening them, if that makes sense. So we're keeping it alive, though, online with a web forum where you can chat, very structured chat forum, podcasts, and also workshops. We're going to do a series of 3 workshops where we come to consensus standards and then apply for further funding for the next research project with partners. So that's the idea. You're welcome to join us if you'd like to. So let us know.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Rachel, our 2 remaining panelists. Thank you to everyone for joining.
Brilliant. So, so we have got an hour ahead, and we've got a really fantastic lineup of contributors. So there'll be plenty of time for them to talk a little bit about their work, particular case study of partnership working around mental health research, but also hopefully sharing with us some of the things they've learned along the way, and any advice that they would share with us tonight. And as we go along, there'll be a chance just to ask any clarifying questions from our speakers, but we should have time at the end for a bit of a panel discussion, so there should be time to have a wider discussion. So just by way of introduction, I really haven't actually introduced myself. I'm Emily Lloyd, and I manage the Emerging Minds Network. So I'm based at the University of Oxford, and our focus over the last 4 years has been primarily children and young people's mental health research. But interestingly, my background actually is in the charity sector. So before that, I spent over 15 years working in the charity sector. So I am really into this topic. So I'm really delighted to be involved this evening. So I've worked on quite a number of different types of partnerships, actually primarily between kind of businesses and the charity sector. But obviously in the last 4 years, really interested in relationships between the universities and charities in particular. So really looking forward to our discussions ahead this evening. So as you know, we've got kind of three different kind of main groups of contributors. So I thought if we could invite Dr. Aiman Asam from Kingston University and Adrienne Katz from Youth Work Consulting, if you could kick us off with your presentation.
I'm not great with timekeeping, so it's 10 minutes and I'm trying to cover 5 minutes, and Adrienne Katz, who's with me today, she will be covering another 5 minutes. So if I'm overstepping that mark, please give me a nudge. So I'm here today to talk about our research, which was funded by eNurture Network, supported by UK Research and Innovation. Our project was titled Vulnerability, Online Lives and Mental Health. I'm here to talk about the partnership experience that we had for this particular project, represented by myself and Kingston University and Youth Works Consultant, as well as Internet Matters, who's a non-profit organization / forward charity, supporting parents and children and keeping them safe online. So a little bit about our research project before we go ahead. I'm a psychologist. I'm really keen on studying mental health of young people. I say young people, anyone between the age of 10 and 17 is a young person in my mind. So mental health, I'm focused on depression, anxiety, problematic internet use. Some research would call it internet-based addictions. I'm also interested in exploring children's experiences of online risk. We combine risk under a few umbrellas: content-based risks, sharing content, problematic content. Also relationships, problematic relationships, that's in the form of contact, and conduct, and cyber aggression, representing behavioral issues online, such as cyberbullying. We also cover cyber scams, or children's experiences of cyber scams online, and identity thefts. We are also concerned about parents' e-safety support, to the extent to which parents support their children online or they don't support them. And our key focus, and what won us the grant mainly, is the group of vulnerable children. Our hypothesis was that vulnerable children, or children with special educational needs, children in the care sector, or children who have mental health difficulties and challenges, are more at risk online, or more likely to experience different forms of risks online. Another layer to our project, we also looked at practitioners, psychologists and social workers' experiences when dealing with children who have been exposed to digital risk. So we are covering the experiences of children as well as practitioners. So that's a kind of brief introduction to our project. Our hypothesis was that vulnerable children are mainly exposed to online risk due to the lack of support, the mental health support that they receive, whether it's from their parents or from practitioners. Why partnership working is important for mental health research, and I'm going to be talking about my experience in here. Bridging the gap. When I first teamed up with Adrienne Katz and Internet Matters, I've highlighted the mental health gap when it comes to online risk. Previous research will tend to focus on cyberbullying victimizations as the sole risk online, whereas we are slowly moving into looking at different forms of risks other than cyberbullying. So I've covered, mental health, and my colleague Adrienne Katz and Internet Matters, we're looking at the e-safety side of things. So there was a gap, and we worked on, filling that gap from different experiences that we had. Research relevance. It's really important that the research topic that we introduced is important and relevant to both parties, or three parties in our case. It was relevant to me because it covered mental health. It was relevant to Adrienne Katz, it covered e-safety, and it was relevant to Internet Matters because it also dives into parental practices. Problem solving is key here. Having 3 partners or 4 partners, we had also different collaborations other than the 3 parties. Problem solving was a lot easier for us because we came at the topic from different angles. I covered research and theory and research methods and research statistics, and I've covered the ethical background of our research, and we've got Adrienne who had access to many schools around the country. So we managed to get a high number of participants, 15,000 participants as a result, and that was kind of a key for the success of our study. Sense of empowerment is quite key. We are really proud, in doing what we are doing. I'm really proud working with Adrienne and Internet Matters, supported by eNurture. The whole experience made our research very worthwhile. And as a result, we have produced different webinars, podcasts, and conferences. And I felt that the community or the end users were trusting in us because of our collaborations. Our collaborations produced objective evaluation of our research in general. The research, every part of our research was validated using experts in the field of e-safety. And another aspect of working in partnership was dissemination. Luckily for us, we were able to reach MPs, decision makers, and policy makers through our partnership with Internet Matters. I mean, obviously, working in partnerships has an academic and practical impact. Academic in a sense that we have produced a number of peer-reviewed papers as a result, and we also inform practice in a sense that we have delivered training for mental health professionals, for parents, and for schools. Lastly, for an academic like myself, this type of research is really important for research excellence framework. And for you who are working in universities, this has led to a significant case study in our next ref, and hopefully it makes a big contribution to the evaluation of research at Kingston University. And here, the following slide will be covered by Adrienne. Adrienne's all over to you now.
Thank you so much, Aiman. We are delighted to be here together. We are actually partners in many different pieces of work across a number of years. And I guess we've built some kind of effective collaboration. We've worked with Internet Matters in a number of ways, but most importantly, in terms of their ability to influence policy. And I'm a member of the UKIS working group on vulnerable children, which was formed immediately after the Westminster launch of our public-facing report of an academic paper we'd written about vulnerable children's online lives and why they were a different case and needed attention. So we did see in quite a short time an opportunity to press for better work and more attention to be paid to vulnerable children online. So you've got to start with a clear and relevant idea that is really meaningful to all partners. With our potential partners, we needed to really identify and learn about them and what their goals were, what was relevant to them. Communication is really important, that everybody's part of the loop and they can have an opportunity really to share their different types of expertise and their motivation and enthusiasm. We need to communicate strengths. Of course, different people have very different strengths within a three-way partnership. Although we work day to day as just the two, YouthWorks and the university, it was then to deliver that through the efforts of Internet Matters. But we had to keep everyone in the loop, and the communication pattern is really important. Well, there were many benefits. One of the things that had worried me for many years is that we've been delivering online safety training to schools, teachers, to children and parents, but they've never really been evaluated or properly evidence-based. And it was the partnership with Aiman that allowed us to begin to do this. And we're in our 5th year of exploring this issue. And I think it would be good in general if the advice we give parents in how they, or foster carers, how they deliver their online safety messages to young people, if those could be more relevant and more nuanced, and all sorts of other things that we've discovered. So everyone has benefited from learning about this. And what I would say about a partnership is that everyone is important. Even though we had leadership from Aiman, it was quite a benign and gentle and supportive leadership. It allowed everyone to blossom, and I think that's very important. We also had advice when needed. You've got to have a reasonable proposal, and by that I mean show that you could actually deliver it, it's deliverable, and that it's evidence-based with a clear potential. We personally like to over-deliver, so then you have to think about, is what you're proposing really practical? And then in funding, you've got to consider the overheads of all the partners, which is another difficulty. But certainly take it into account from the beginning and divide up the funding beforehand. So in the next slide, we look at how to build effective collaborations in other ways. There are always challenges, barriers, and difficulties, some unforeseen. The capacity of the different partners may be very different. The researchers may be working flat out on the research, but the partners may be doing a whole lot of other very high priority pieces of work. Young people need multiple ways of participating and giving feedback, and we need to be able to feed back to the young people afterwards about what happened to their contribution. And I'm very conscious that today we're sitting here without the young people, and we have had absolutely moving and wonderful testimony from young people during the period we've been working together. And I think one of the interesting things was always trying to give them feedback about what we did with their data or what we did with what they said. And sometimes they massively changed our thinking. So they were like another partner. And we had to prepare for the fact that they had varied abilities and make it possible for them to take part whatever level of ability they had. And we had a lot of children with difficulties, multiple difficulties, and this was really important. Yes, the partners may have different priorities, especially if they come from the charity sector and an academic sector or an online safety training priority sector. And then we have to care for staff, especially those who go out to consult, considering their travel subsistence and support, as well as obvious things like DBS checks and safeguarding. It was sometimes necessary to debrief staff who told us of really difficult experiences when young people had disclosed quite distressing things to them. And so that debrief is another aspect. Delays. We could write a book about delays. We hit COVID early on, or COVID hit us, and we were delayed in lots of ways, but we managed somehow to adapt. And lastly, academics and frontline practitioners and professionals speak a different language. And this is absolutely important to understand. In my very first piece of work with academics 20 years ago, some people in the department didn't want to say hello in case I quoted them in a newspaper. So they were very hostile and very worried. Fortunately, Aiman and Kingston are not so inclined, and we agree everything we release together beforehand. So I would say the other aspect of different languages is that we rewrite, or we write another object, another report or paper after our peer-reviewed paper has appeared, interpreting it for the front line in another language, another kind of English. So there you have some possible challenges and tips. You can contact us at these contact addresses, and you can see all our recent research evidence on the enablepathway.com website, where we are currently working with foster carers and children. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aiman and Adrienne. That was so interesting. And a few questions I would love to ask you later about just how you kind of found each other. You know, how did this begin, if you like? You know, because it sounds like it's been a long-standing and very very fruitful partnership. But I don't know if anyone else had any questions that sprung to mind as Aiman and Adrienne were talking. If you do, I don't know if you'd like to say a little bit about how did you begin working?
I was a researcher myself to start with, and Adrienne was a participant. So Adrienne was a participant, representing practice at the time, and in my interview, she told me that she has this massive data, and she thinks that there is a gap in knowledge with regard to vulnerable young people. And I took that data on and analyzed the whole data. We produced a meaningful report, the report that you saw on the last slide, and that report was launched in Westminster by the time MP Margaret James, and it led to the grant that we had from eNurture, and I think that was a significant piece of work. It was accidental, the meeting at the time with Adrienne. Adrienne knew internet matters through her professional life, and I think this is how we came together. And I sensed an opportunity there because I'm curious, because I work with mental health and and young people, and the collaboration process was pretty easy, and we spoke the same language, the same motivation and enthusiasm, I think, and we kept it going until now. And we were actually successful in a different grant following the UKRI grant. So I think the collaboration has been for 5 years, but hopefully for more years to come.
I think one of the interesting things also was that I have been collecting data from young people since 2008, and with this partnership, Aiman was able to make our questionnaire more rigorous. And I think that was a very big contribution, really, because I had a way of collecting data from young people and getting them to tell us really important things. But by structuring the questionnaire in a rigorous, more academic way, it was more valid. And then with Internet Matters, we were able to get some funding to actually get a bigger sample, a more widespread sample across the country. So many things improved along the journey, you might say. And I think that eagerness to take advantage of what each partner brings, that has been our strength since 2017. And I think we each appreciate what the other partners have brought to the work we do.
Fab. That's really, really interesting. Andre.
Thanks, Emily. I just had a question about controversy, I suppose. I guess it's quite a controversial or sensitive, or it's an area that you're working with. There's lots of misinformation online, and I wondered if there's something about the partnership that helped you work out how to behave in that sort of difficult, sensitive environment. That's a really poorly worded question, but do you get where I'm coming from?
I'm very aware of the controversies and the very contested areas. So I tend to be very alert to them where possible. And so we have the conversations quite frequently about what is contested and what isn't contested. And we really try to avoid those kinds of dogmatic positions about all social media is bad for children's mental health, or you just simply can't generalize. And really, for some children, their online life is an escape from their offline life, and it's absolutely vital to them. So we keep an open mind. We try to read as much other research by other people as possible and keep on top of the field all the time. You really can't sit back if you're looking at the digital space. You can't sit back for a second. You've got to be fully reading it, and we debate it and try to be measured and evidenced. That's all you can do, really, is try to look at what is the evidence and how can you keep an open mind and be well informed by researchers you respect, I think. But it's a very contested field, for sure, and rightly so.
Right, I think we could carry on, I think, with lots of questions for Aiman and Adrienne, but we have got to move on to our next contributor. So we're really delighted to be joined by Hazel Cheeseman, who's the Deputy CEO of ASH. So really wonderful to have you here, Hazel.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel a bit of an interloper because I'm not a mental health organisation, obviously. Public health organisation, but really delighted to be following Kingston University because I am sat just around the corner from Kingston University, so that's nice. And I have a case study that I will talk about, but I'm also going to talk in more general terms. And I think I'm going to focus, ASH, if you know us, we're an advocacy organisation. We campaign for policy and legislative changes around smoking and tobacco. So I'm really going to focus on us as an advocacy organisation and how we use research in that way, and use kind of some of our mental health relationships as an illustration. Okay, so there's lots of logos here. Oh, I'll go on to my first slide. So we were founded by the Royal College of Physicians about just over 50 years ago, and we're quite small. There's only 8 of us, and our approach has not changed massively in those 50 years. We're seeking to end the harm from smoking through advocating for change in policy and legislation, but also in supporting the implementation of evidence-based policy. And when I come to this subject, I found it really difficult to almost disentangle our relationship with research organisations because it's so entrenched in the DNA of ASH. We were founded by a Royal College. Our relationship with academics goes back to our kind of founding principles. And it's been really at the core of our approach to advocacy is to be with the research and work with researchers. And that's partly because the issue that we have been pursuing has had well-funded opposition, and therefore being grounded in the research has been really, really important to be able to move the agenda forward when you have a very well-funded, self-confident opposition to the things that you're advocating for in the tobacco industry. And so researchers and research organisations are absolutely threaded through all the work we do. So we convene the Smoke-Free Action Coalition, which has many universities as members. We also convene a group called the Mental Health and Smoking Partnership, which is where some of the things I will talk about today rest. But we're also members of kind of going in the other direction. ASH, in our role as the Smoke-Free Action Coalition, is a member of Spectrum, which is the public health consortium of academic institutions working on tobacco. So we have this very kind of engaged relationship with academia. Then I wanted to just take a step back and just think about what are we for? Why do NGOs exist to do this kind of advocacy work, and therefore what's the role of research in relation to that? So we see ourselves as fundamentally part of the policy-making process, and we exist because there's challenging problems that are not easy to solve. We've been trying to solve it for 50 years. We've made progress, but we're not there yet. So we do that by describing the problem really clearly, identifying what the solutions will be, and making the space for action. And academic partners are important to every aspect of that approach. They absolutely help us to describe the problem. Of course, they help us to identify the solution and monitor the effect of implementing different policies. And also, they're really important partners in making the space for action. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But before I do, I'm going to reflect on the constraints of us as an organisation. And I think there are some things that will chime with the previous presentation as well, and what Adrienne was saying. So we are really, particularly ASH, but also many organisations in our position are quite precarious institutions. And I know that academics can feel that their individual circumstances can be fairly precarious, sort of one grant to the next, but your institutions are unlikely to disappear tomorrow. Whereas, you know, an organisation like ASH is quite small and it's quite easy, relatively easy for it to disappear. Our influence has to be cultivated based on our reputation and our relationships. We have no inherent power. We have no kind of there's nothing inherent reason for anyone to engage with us, apart from the reputation that we bring. We don't have the power or the influence to kind of make the weather. We have to be very responsive, very agile in order to respond to the environment that we find, and kind of make the most of opportunities when they present themselves. But that's in a context of our objectives often being very ambitious and long-term and difficult to do. So we're in a kind of unusual, difficult position. But those might be our constraints, but we also have real freedoms. You know, we are often organisations with really clear mission and clear focus. We can have, as ASH, we have very wide and impactful networks, you know, across local government, across the NHS, national government, media. We have the ability to form lots and lots of really creative relationships. We can move really quickly, much more quickly than an academic institution can often move, or any other kind of, you know, the NHS, local government, we can move really fast. And, you know, because of that speed and the ability to kind of be everywhere and create networks, you know, we can creatively link things together. And ASH in particular plays this inside outside a relationship. We go into government, we have those close conversations, and we can come out, we can be critical friends, and we can bring in other information. And it's this creativity and space which I think is really valued by the partners that we work with. So I just wanted to reflect a bit on policymaking process, or this terribly ordered thing where you identify the problem and then you work out the solution. Blah, blah, blah. This is how it all works. It's all really beautiful. But of course, that's not really how policy works. It's just complete chaos most of the time, with all sorts of different connections and pressures and reasons why things happen the way they do. And it can be bamboozling, I think, for people in the academic world when they want to land their research, they want it to have impact on, you know, they've identified something really, really important that they need policymakers to hear. But how do you land it in this chaos? And you need organizations like ASH who are kind of in this world all the time, who can help to navigate these messy connections, this messy environment, and to land the research in the places where it needs to land, and communicate it in the way it needs to be communicated. And one of the reasons why that matters is because to really affect sort of powerful policy choices requires lots of political capital. So this sort of ladder of interventions, you know, may not apply directly to lots of other policy areas, but you get the idea that to do things which have might have very big impact. So if you look at thinking about in the context of smoke-free legislation, that required an enormous amount of political capital to implement, because it's quite high up that ladder of interventions. And you need organizations, you know, evidence will not be, was never enough to achieve smoke-free legislation. There was loads of evidence that secondhand smoke was harmful. There was loads of evidence that prohibiting smoking in workplaces would help people's health, but you would not have got over the line without advocates who could kind of navigate that environment. And I would really recommend here, I'm sure that the slides can be circulated. There's a brilliant presentation by Chris Whitty looking at it's particular to public health. Well, it's about public health, but I don't think that the message in there is particular to public health, about how the state, you know, how it chooses what it does on public health and the kind of relationship between the state and public health. Is a really, really fabulous lecture. And then there's also a link here to something about how we secured smoke free legislation and how advocacy was part of achieving that. But academics are obviously really, really key to that policy making process, absolutely key in illustrating the policy problems, in providing the evidence to inform policy change. And they also have resource and authority to communicate the case in a way that, you know, tiny NGOs like ASH don't have. You know, we're seen as perhaps marginal special interest group, but, you know, University of York comes along, King's College London comes along, University College London comes along and says the same thing. It has a different impact and they have a different reach and a different voice, and they're really, really, really important. So I'm going to go into my case study now. So we have, as I say, we've got lots and lots of different relationships, but it was the relationship that we have with the University of York that I think brought me to this event today. So I'm going to talk about one of the pieces of work. So the piece of research which they had undertaken was a intervention in with people with long-term serious mental health conditions, engaged in secondary mental health care, and it was providing smoking cessation support to that population where smoking prevalence is very, very high and where existing models didn't seem to be as effective at helping people to stop smoking, even though motivation is just as high in that population as anywhere else. So one of the problems is that addiction tends to be more acute among people with SMI than among other smokers. So they conceived of this randomized controlled trial. It was large scale, it was really, really well conducted. It produced a result which showed if you run a support program in this way, you can help this population of people to stop smoking. And that is really, really good news. So that's great. And the University of York did a really good job of disseminating their research in all sorts of ways, but we were really able to add value to that. We weren't directly involved in the piece of research, but we were able to work with them after the event and have continued to work with them quite closely. So they've become kind of the centerpiece of some of the policy research that we package and put out there. So this is a report that we produced in partnership with lots of other mental health organisations, and the research that University of York did was almost, was a real kind of centerpiece of that, showing, look, it is possible to intervene for this population if you have the right things in place. And that was important because it was a broader strategy, but it landed this whole idea with government and with other mental health organisations that intervention was possible within a kind of broader framework. We did all sorts of other things to communicate the research finding. We run webinars where we have people from the NHS, from local government, other places, come and listen to the researchers talk about their research. We do the thing that Adrienne was talking about, and like retelling the research in language that people can actually access and understand, because they're not necessarily kind of in the language of randomized control trials. And we kind of really socialize his research and, told people it was important, told people that there was something they could do. So when the NHS was looking at what they could do in relation to the protecting the future of the NHS in a process that became the NHS long-term plan, we had a ready-made solution we could go and take to them and say, you need to talk to the people at the University of York. They know what the solution is. And that basically resulted in a commitment in the NHS long-term plan to fund this type of programme within the NHS. And obviously that wasn't totally down to the work that we were doing, but it's all part of the kind of general push and general noise that's being made around that work. But also it's not over. This piece of research is really, really important, and it's something that we hold and carry and continue to promote. So we've pushing it and made sure there were references to it into a new independent review that the government has commissioned on smoking. And it will continue to have life, and we will continue to advocate for it. But it now spins into new relationships. So we're talking to colleagues at York about, can we be working together to look at how we might apply this kind of model into early intervention services? Is there something we can develop together? Where else can we take some of these ideas in collaboration? So just final few reflections on how academia and NGOs can really work effectively together. I realise I've been talking maybe a little bit too long, sorry. So there's something about we can be formally engaged in your research, but with small organisations, you think about how would it help our objectives to be involved in your work, and do you really need us? Because if I sat on every single study I was invited to sit on, I wouldn't have time to do anything else. But you don't need us to be in your project in order for us to work creatively and communicate your findings. And that's probably the best role that you can play for us. This is our bread and butter, how to communicate research findings in an effective way. And so work, find people who can do that for you creatively. And build, and I think Adrienne was talking about this as well. It's like building that trust to have a kind of iterative relationship around how you communicate often quite complex things. You need to find ways of communicating with impact, but you have to, in order to shape the policy debate, but you have to stick to the evidence. We have to be kept honest too, at the same time as finding the right language to speak with impact. And sometimes those things are in tension, and we need to work really closely together to find right ways of talking about things impactfully, but accurately. But you have to acknowledge that things have to happen in the world without complete information, and the perfect can't be the enemy of the good. So waiting, saying, or we need, the conclusion cannot always be that we need more research. The conclusion sometimes have to be, let's do this, and we also need more research. And I will stop there.
Thanks so much, Hazel. I feel like I had a real kind of little whistle stop kind of insight into your world and what it is to, work in an organisation like ASH and navigate, attempt to navigate all the policy making arena. Thanks so much for that. So I think in the interest of time, if there's any kind of quick kind of just clarifying questions for Hazel, then please do raise your hand or pop them in the chat. But otherwise, let's people a chance. We'll go on to our next contributors, if that's okay. But I'm sure if anyone has any questions, Hazel might pick up in the chat. And I think the presentations, I think, will be shared with contributors' permission, kind of by the Eventbrite email. So if there's any of those talks that Hazel highlighted or any links, you can look those up. Fab. Okay, so lots of love, lots of love coming in for Hazel on the chat there, and how to stay in touch with you there, Hazel. Fab. Okay, so let's just move on then to our last kind of contributors for the evening. So we're going to have a couple of speakers from that we've worked with through our Emerging Minds network. So I was just going to kind of quickly introduce the programme. So let me share the slides now. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah. Fab. So when we began the Emerging Minds Network, we had lots of conversations with the charity partners that were involved in quite a formal way with the network. And one of the key things they said quite early on was that it's quite frustrating sometimes, particularly working for some of the big charities, to kind of often to be approached by researchers at quite a late stage, asking for help kind of recruiting participants for an existing trial. And somebody kind of made up, I think it was one colleague from Young Minds kind of said, what would be really helpful is we would love, to have researchers just come and join us and help us with the research questions we're grappling with, in our teams. And so really this idea was born out of that those ideas. And so the concept was to work with host organisations to develop a brief, and then we helped the host organisations find applicants from early career researcher applicants from across the UK, and those early career researchers undertook 3-month placements with charity hosts. So I've just highlighted on the slide here, so Yasmin and Vanessa also undertook placements with the NSPCC and Childline and the Centre for Mental Health respectively, and there's one of but we're really delighted today to be joined by Dr. Susie Sepietz from the University of Kent and Georgia Harper from Autistica, and I'll hand over to them just now.
Hello, sorry. My name is Georgia Harper and I lead the policy team at Autistica, the UK's autism research and campaigning charity. We also manage Embracing Complexity, which is a coalition of over 60 organisations supporting neurodivergent people. So that includes conditions like ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. There are some links on that slide, which will be sent around so you can find out more. Most people with neurodevelopmental conditions have more than one. Brains don't always fit the very neat boxes we've given them, but research, policy and services alike are often set up to only see one condition at a time, which prevents millions of people from getting the right support. And unfortunately, mental ill health is also very high in this group. Go to the next slide, please. In 2020, we were lucky enough to be joined by Susie Sapietz, then a PhD student at University of Warwick, for 6 months as part of the Emerging Minds cross-sector placement scheme. During her placement, Susie collated dozens of different research priority exercises, including James Lind Alliance exercises, and interviewed researchers across neurodevelopment to find out more about the challenges of essentially studying more than one condition at a time, as well as the full report, which you can read on that link. She also wrote 2 blogs for Emerging Minds and the Mental Health to help disseminate the findings, as well as wider Embracing Complexity work, and was also really crucial in setting up a special interest research group, also funded by Emerging Minds, on neurodivergence and mental health. Obviously, we're really limited for time today, but I've included a link to the full report there so you can find out more. But for now, if you could move on to the next slide, just a few lessons from our collaboration with Emerging Minds. Improving research on neurodiversity was a very high priority for Embracing Complexity. At the time, the only person working on the coalition full-time was me, and I work in policy. I'm not an academic, so it was hugely invaluable for our research arm to be developed by someone in the know. It was my first time actually managing anyone, and I was amazed by Susie's ability to just kind of know what needed to be done and put this together with quite minimal input from me. And it gave me, having basically a researcher leading research recommendations, gave me and hopefully others confidence that our recommendations are actually feasible and gives us something to build on in the long term. On that note, research does obviously take a long time to do well, and potentially longer than many charities are used to for tangible outputs. But we have found that it's our biggest opportunity for change. Without improvements in research around neurodiversity, services are left guessing at what works and end up being kind of as ineffective as they often are now. So my top tip, I guess, would be to be open to take a chance on people you don't normally work with and get their perspective. Working in policy and campaigns, the temptation is often to basically shout at whoever isn't focusing on your cause enough. But sometimes if you get these opportunities, it's more effective to ask why and consider what would make it easier for them to take action, whether that's NHS or research teams. That's me. I think I'm passing on to Susie.
Hi, thank you so much for the really quick overview of our project, Georgia. So I'm Susie Sapietz. I'm currently at the University of Kent, and in addition to working with Embracing Complexity through the Emerging Minds cross-sector placement, I've also got some research collaboration experience with charities throughout my PhD and my postdoc role as well. So these sort of these are the things I've learned and tips for effective collaborative partnerships. So firstly, it's really important to identify organisations or researchers that share the same goals and values as you. So as you'll sort of help each other achieve these things if your goals and values align, rather than you being sort of pulled in different directions. And so yeah, that's why I've worked mainly with Embracing Complexity and also other sort of small neurodivergent charities like Cerebra, MenCap, Ambitious About Autism, and the Challenging Behaviour Foundation. Each of all are sort of dedicated to improving the lives of neurodivergent people. The second thing I've learned is that it's really important to build relationships with the people you're working with in the organisation. So you know, get to know them, find out what they're doing, what they're interested in, and sort of challenges, and then also share yours, because there's likely to be quite a lot of overlaps, more areas than you might have thought. And this can sort of spark ideas that lead to new projects, and, you know, also networking and sharing information, you know, both ways, through research and charities and other organisations. So, as Georgia mentioned earlier, through the placement I did, Embracing Complexity, we since worked together on the special interest research group. And also Embracing Complexity hosted a webinar where some research assistants I supported in my postdoc role were able to share findings from a project I completed at Kent. So, you know, we're continuing to work with each other and, you know, keep each other updated on what we're doing. The third thing is that it has been talked about a bit already, but obviously there's lots of benefits for both the organisation and the researchers. So through collaborating with charities, I've been able to share my research skills, so designing and conducting studies, data analysis, writing reports, all those sorts of things. But personally, I've benefited sort of massively as I've, you know, developed my research portfolio, and it's really helped me learn how to sort of think about impact of research. So one of the pieces of work I did with the charity was on the use and impact of restrictive interventions for young children in schools, which was sort of launched at a House of Lords event. So I was able to see it sort of be shared quite widely, and you know, if you're not working in partnership, then I think you'd struggle to sort of make that impact. And yeah, so lastly, the key thing I've learned is that these effective collaborative partnerships are really crucial to achieving impact, because there are differences in how, you know, different organisations, charities and researchers work. So from my experience, charities are doing a lot more work on things like policy, campaigns, and also sort of direct support for people and advocacy, whereas research are often more focused on, you know, the day-to-day running of, you know, getting funding for studies, running studies and publishing and those sorts of things. So obviously it's a lot slower process of, you know, getting the evidence, but the evidence that, you know, you get through research can, if you work with charities and other organisations, you can feed into policy practice as well as just future research, which obviously happens. So yeah, collaboration is really key to achieving impact and real world change. So yeah, they're my lessons and tips, and I'll pass it over to Carolina.
Yeah, really happy to introduce Carolina from the University of Oxford, who is a PhD student. Carolina, are you okay to?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I've skipped ahead. Sorry, Kathleen. Here we go.
There we go. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So hello, my name is Carolina Guzman, and I'm a PhD student in experimental psychology at the University of Oxford. And so earlier this year, I completed a cross-sector placement with Emerging Minds and the charity Mental Health Innovations. And so today I'm very happy to talk about my experience in the placement. Great, thanks. So the partner charity that I worked with was Mental Health Innovations. And so essentially they're a digital mental health charity which uses data, digital innovation, data-driven analysis, and the experience of clinical experts to improve the mental health of the UK population. And so one of their first services was Shout, which essentially was a crisis tech support service aiming to help texters or young people, anyone who texted into the service because they were struggling to cope or had any difficulties. And then they were immediately, or after some time, they were replied with a volunteer from the organization, which sort of helped them reach a cooler calm after being in a very heated moment. And so, so far, Shout has had over 1.5 million text conversations, over 500,000 individuals, presenting with different issues. And so the charity realized that actually over 30% of their conversations were with young people. And from those, 30% were actually related to very high-risk individuals who had or were experiencing suicidal feelings. And so for my project, I specifically looked at different factors from the conversation and from individuals that would allow us to identify how or what made conversations de-escalate. All right, and next slide, perfect, thank you. So I worked in partnership with them for about 3 months, and personally for me, it was a great opportunity to learn from this collaboration how to integrate clinical practice, evidence-based research, and digital innovation to understand unique aspects of young people's mental health. And definitely this is something that wouldn't have happened had it not been for Emerging Minds facilitating this cross-sector placement. And so based on my experience, I thought it would be useful to provide my perspective and tips for working with charities as an early career researcher. So my first point is that it is important to contribute our expertise to the needs and demands of a charity. So charities are in a great position to know what problems we are facing, because they're constantly monitoring mental health trends, which also puts them in a really good position to understand sort of what is triggering any specific mental health problem in the UK population and act quickly. But also, for my second point, I think it's very important to be open about interests, about your personal interests as an early career researcher or student, and think together of ways that these can be incorporated in the collaboration. So this way you can do something that not only are we passionate about, but perhaps may also allow us to explore whether it's something that you can do outside of an academic setting, which is really important. And then for my third point is to be prepared to work at a very different pace. And so in academia, I think we're very used to working on one research project, taking quite a lot of time and accounting for a lot of different details. And so in this collaboration, I actually found that research turnarounds were very fast and often more focused on a bigger picture. And so charities are often also working on multiple projects at once, and they're constantly being updated with new data and new projects. So the pace changes very often compared to what it would in an academic setting. And then lastly, it's just to get to know everyone in the team, everyone in the charity. Everyone has a very important role to play, and it is likely that you or in my case, I was working closely with a lot of them. And this is very useful to learn what other people are doing and how a project can be improved by having different people collaborate on it, as opposed to sort of working on a project alone, which is what most students or early career researchers tend to do. So I think these are sort of my main tips and points as a student. And I'm happy now to hand it over to Emily.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carolina. There was lots of nods as you were talking there about, particularly around the pace of and ways of working. So I think a lot resonated with others there. Yeah, so we do have some time now, which is great. For any questions or comments. So I did see, I know Alexandra, I think you're still with us. You had a couple of really interesting points there. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it was a question about it's a collaboration question in general, because it kind of comes up when we're talking to policymakers about the perceptions of each other. And there's this kind of tension, because I think I'm a researcher and a clinician, and I think people tend to perceive researchers as taking ages to get anywhere. And actually my clinical colleagues sometimes think, I go into clinic and I make a plan and I do something, and me and the patient, we agree something, and you researchers, you take months to, apply for a grant and then do it. And I think I just wondered what people here felt about that. Do they think, yes, we understand why you take ages and it's justified, or well, we sort of get it, but what on earth are you doing? I'd just love to know how people perceive that. I've only got 40.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, fantastic. Thanks, Alexandra. It would be really great to hear from, I don't know, Hazel, have you got any thoughts? Also come to you, Adrienne, in a second.
I mean, that's obviously the stereotype exists sometimes because it's partly true, but I also work with academics who move at such pace and turn things around really rapidly. I think it is, obviously it's horses for courses. Like if you're going to do like a really large scale trial to prove something really important, you have to take the time to do it. Whereas if you're collecting data on so we work with, there's a project at UCL called the Smoking Toolkit Study. It's rolling monthly data, they get it.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah, because we were due to return to the main room at 10 to. So apologies, Hazel. You were just in the middle of telling us about some examples of, I think it was a UCL, wasn't it? The different.
Yeah, so they're very responsive. So not only do they obviously they publish, blah blah blah. You know, you have to academics. You know, you guys need to get something out of it too. So you know, peer review publications, or you know, those sorts of things are important. But I think the best academics that I work with are able to flex between we need to turn something around really quickly because it's really important for this policy moment that Ash are able to say X to a minister or whatever, and here's the data and you can use it and it won't compromise the thing that really matters and is high status for me in my academic world in terms of publishing a paper. So I think it's important for us to understand that academics can't always just pull the data out of their study and give it to you because you really want it, because that compromises the integrity of what they're doing. But at the same time that the academics are able to kind of, where it's appropriate, flex and say, here, use this stuff, use this stats, you know, this is really important, it will have impact. But I guess that's all back to building that trust. And I think Adrienne, if I'm saying your name right, sorry, and you were saying earlier that sometimes academics kind of wouldn't say boo to you because they weren't sure what you would do with that information. And I guess it is about, because I understand that, and it is about establishing trust that if I share this with you, you're not going to represent it inaccurately, or you're not going to use it in a forum that would compromise my integrity. And I guess it's incumbent on us to build those relationships as well as an NGO sector.
Is there anything you'd add to that, Adrienne, from either from your perspective or, you know, colleagues in your sector? What are their perceptions of researchers?
I think we've had battles with press agencies, media agencies that one partner has retained to put out a message, for example, that we feel distorts the research message because it's trying for a sensationalized headline. And when you tame it down, it doesn't get picked up by the media. So that is always a conflict, and you have to manage it somehow, but it's well to be alert to it. Just to go back to what Hazel was saying, sometimes you can respond really quickly. An academic team can respond quickly if the data is already there. If the charity or other service, if you're a medical service, you might have the data anyway. So if the data is available and the funding is available, obviously they can be really quick. If they've got to design how the data is collected and they have to apply for the funding, you have to accept that that is a long cycle.
Any other questions or topics that have come up for you as we've been going on?
Yeah, raising my hand.
Yeah,
actually.
You go for it. Yeah.
One of the things I perhaps should have said, and I think also again it speaks to the other presentations as well, is that as organisations we are often undertaking research ourselves, and that's a real opportunity for, often we found, particularly for early career researchers. You know, we conduct a survey, a public opinion survey that we've been running now since 2006. We've got loads of data. You know, people come to us with a research question. It's like, oh, go here, have some data, get on with it. And so I think there are lots of opportunities for early career researchers to find really interesting projects by engaging with the NGO sector and finding networks where that kind of happenstance conversation can come about, where you can be like, oh no, actually I've got some data on that. It'd be great if someone analysed it and wrote it up.
Yeah, that's right. And well, that sounds like a bit like the story for Aiman and Adrienne, wasn't it? It was, that was kind of seemed like how that conversation began, really, wasn't it? With your data, Adrienne, and then Aiman kind of being quite curious and picking up the opportunity to explore what could be done with it. Yeah, I agree. And certainly the early career researcher placements was very much about that, wasn't it? I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Carolina, because I know in terms of how you fitted in with the existing data or research that was happening already in the charity.
Definitely. So I was very lucky, and they had such a unique and very rich data set to work with. And so in this case, I think that definitely helped streamline a lot of the process, make things quicker. But it was great because they understood sort of the needs and demands of everyone, what needed to be done, what sort of the government policymakers, what they were commissioning, what they wanted to know. And so they also saw that within their own data, there were patterns that emerged indicating that, there were some groups that were more at risk, and it was definitely important to examine that further. And so that's when I jumped on board that project. But not only that, but I also have my own other interests. So I have a particular interest in peer relationships and bullying, and I was also able to incorporate that and look at those questions within that data. And so I think it was a combination of what they had that was really important to look at, but also my own personal interest, which they were very keen for me to also look at. So it was definitely a very good collaborative experience.
Fantastic. Well, we are going to return to the main room now after that. But thanks so much, everyone. It's been so fascinating to hear more about your work. So thanks so much for everyone's contributions. And we'll return to the main room just for some final comments. But thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So in fact, hopefully there were sort of productive discussions in both groups. Sorry about the technical hitch. But I think we got through it, certainly in our group anyway. So we have some of our speakers with us, and with the remaining 10 minutes, one of the things I'd like to do is ask them each to provide us with a top tip for working in partnership across charity and academic sectors. I'll come to you first, Robin, if that's okay. You're the first person in my group, so let's hear from you first.
Great. Yeah, so I think that my kind of top tip really would just be about kind of appreciating the kind of the sympathetic things that we have in common, but also the kind of difference of perspective and how we communicate, different timelines, and contact with different kinds of kind of decision makers and people who often kind of having close lived experience of the issue as well. So kind of appreciate the difference would be my tip.
That's brilliant. Very succinct and very memorable too. Rachel, I know you've just finished presenting, so it may seem like we're throwing you another question just after you've finished answering questions, but what would be your top tip? You're on mute. Rachel, sorry, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I can't believe I did that, but yes, so I think it's really important to gauge the value of why you're together for the beginning, because you're offering different things, and actually the differences between you are the interesting part of it. The different methods, the different ways of networking, the different ways of working, but there's a very important to listen to each other about what the different pressures are, and also to really value what you have. So with academics, you've got the evidence base and you've got the time to consider the ideas behind it. With practitioners, you've got the ability to understand, can they actually use these methods in their day-to-day work? And how does that reflect in real life? And with survivors and survivor leaders, experts by experience that we work with, it's a case of always working ethically, and again, listening to what the value is, but also recognizing the difference. So it's about giving that space, I think, and making sure that people are contributing in a way that fits with their existing methods of working. Because if you're going to disrupt those methods of working, you're going to end up with frisson, which you don't need. So I would say, go about it that way and always be extremely positive about the difference that everybody brings.
Thanks, Rachel. And I like what you said in the other session around being a newbie at podcasting, kind of the partnerships being able to skill up people in different skills. Hazel, would you like to share something?
It's difficult when people do before you, because I wouldn't disagree with anything anyone said. But I think to say something different, I think there's something about having like a longer term relationship with academics. I think we were sort of exploring where there's some of those opportunistic relationships can emerge. And we've got several sort of forums where we work on an ongoing kind of iterative basis with academics over time. And it's through those relationships that really good quality partnerships emerge. So on kind of set piece studies, but also just that kind of more opportunistic kind of policy environment. So finding and being part and inhabiting the same networks would be my one line, I suppose.
Thank you. Completely agree with that. That's something I've picked up from sort of working with the networks too. Thank you for that. Next, I got Adrienne. Do you have a top tip that you'd like to share with us?
I think if you do create a successful partnership, try and make it work for more than one piece of work, because it's actually quite unique. Some people find a lot of friction, and if you've got good partners, it's really worth it to try and develop together so that you mature what your work is about and your understanding together. I think that's really important if you're lucky enough to have a good partner.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to be some partnerships don't work out, do they? So you have to be lucky sometimes to have a good partner. Aiman, do you have anything to follow on from that?
Yeah, I mean, I've put partnership, long-term partnership as my first tip, and Hazel and Adrienne both actually mentioned it. And I think that's an important tip. It's not one project, it's many projects hopefully in the future. So I'll mention something else, probably not relevant, but don't let the admin or admin generally get in the way. Because admin, people working in HR, people like myself who have to recruit research assistants and so forth, that sometimes can be disturbing or disturbing the flow on the timeline. Try to understand the process of admin and how they work. We talk about academics could work slowly or quickly, but that's often determined by how quickly HR, and the admin side is working behind the screen, or behind us, generally speaking. So it's not solely my responsibility. It's a university thing. There are HR involved, finance involved, and so forth, and that could delay the process of research. So I think, yeah, paying attention to admin challenges is quite key.
Absolutely. Never forget the logistics involved in these sorts of things. Emily, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess the thing that's really struck me actually from today is just this idea about being curious and open. And I was really struck by the number of partnerships and collaborations that came out from just sharing openly what challenges you're facing, what questions you're interested in, really being interested in what your potential partner is interested in. That and this kind of idea of curiosity, I was really struck by that, and also a lot of discussion I think has come out, hasn't it, around talking in different languages, but also recognizing that the impact of our different voices, our respective voices, can make a big difference. So just being aware of that. I don't know if you can, I think we.
Thanks, Emily.
Hand it back to you.
Okay. Was there anyone else from your group, Emily, who wanted to contribute a tip? I mean, I know you have others in your group.
Yeah. What about you, Susie? Do you want to share a tip from your perspective?
Okay then. So my tip would be just to at the start really identify who you want to collaborate with. So either if you're in a charity or an organisation, find the researchers that share your values or your goals. or vice versa, if you're a researcher, find those charities that are, you know, that share those values and goals, because that's how you'll achieve the biggest difference and the biggest positive contribution.
Thank you very much. I think that's something we haven't actually come to. That did come up in the groups. You know, you had to the value base is quite important, and sometimes the bureaucracies and stuff get in the way of that. Emily, anyone else from your group?
Georgia, Carolina, did you want to add anything? Georgia, yeah.
I guess, I mean, this may have already been covered, but I know in our group we talked a lot about like timescales, and I guess what I'd say is that it, you know, while it might not be what charities and policy teams are often used to, it is worth taking the time to, you know, undertake or support a really thorough research project, because it will then set you up for policy change that works, as opposed to kind of guessing at something in the short term and it maybe not being as effective.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's difficult to do these things, you know, without a substantial amount of time, and you can't really guess what's going to happen. Emily, anyone else from your group?
I think we should. I think that's everything from us. Are we?
Perfect. Thank you. In that case, I would like to close the session. I know, George, you wanted to come back in and play a video. So I'd like to thank everybody for speaking, all of our panelists. Thank Andre from the mental health for setting everything up. George and Daisy from McPin, and Vanessa and Kathy from PIN and from Oxford, for making sure everything runs smoothly. Now you'll see on the screen, Andre's put a poll, which is it's if you can fill this out before you go, that would be really great. That would really help us. Do check out the video, which will be appearing on YouTube soon, so we'll send the link out to everybody who turned up. Also check out the Mental Health Research Matters campaign hashtag on Twitter, if you're still using Twitter, and the other videos to the other sessions, the other 3 sessions that are already on YouTube. And hopefully we will see everyone else again. And it's been good to sort of make connections around this topic of partnership. Apologies for running out of time slightly, but we will leave. I'll close the session. And George, if you wanted to put our final mental health research matters video on before we go, then that would be great. Thank you, everybody.